We are living in a civilization where volume is often mistaken for intelligence, where the loudest speaker is assumed to be the wisest, and where attention is treated as truth. A society once fueled by philosophy, reasoning, and the pursuit of virtue has gradually learned to crown confidence over clarity and entertainment over understanding. Humanity, capable of remarkable intellectual depth, has begun to idolize superficiality wrapped in boldness. If we ask when this shift happened, the answer is not found in technology alone, but in the collective psychology behind it. We no longer value wisdom, we value visibility. We no longer search for enlightenment, we search for stimulation. And in this descent, Socrates stands as a mirror from the past. He once walked through Athens with nothing but questions, sharp questions, that stripped away illusion and exposed false knowledge. He never claimed to know everything. Instead, he admitted, "I know that I know nothing." That humility, once a foundation of intelligence, is now treated as weakness. Today, admitting uncertainty is seen as failure, while speaking loudly even without understanding is celebrated as strength. Socrates challenged the false wise men of his era, the sophists, who mastered persuasion without truth. Their descendants are alive today in the form of influencers, media personalities, politicians, and self-declared experts who trade reality for attention. They thrive not because they are right, but because they are noticed. Our digital platforms have become the new agora, but instead of dialogue, they reward spectacle. Instead of logic, they amplify opinion. Knowledge is no longer scarce, it is drowning us, yet wisdom has grown rare. Information has multiplied, but comprehension has not. We scroll endlessly, absorbing fragments of thought like fast food, never digesting long enough to transform information into understanding. Modern society is not destroyed by ignorance, but by the illusion of knowledge, by people who believe they understand simply because they have encountered information. Socrates warned that when pleasure and entertainment take precedence over truth, decline begins. We have reached that threshold. We no longer admire thinkers who question, we admire performers who distract. We prefer dopamine to depth, reaction to reflection. We consume ideas emotionally, not logically. And as a result, our intellectual muscles weaken. We react more and think less. We speak more and listen less. We judge instantly and rarely consider slowly. The world celebrates those who look important rather than those who are accurate. We reward confidence more than competence. We mock doubt instead of respecting it. In this climate, humility feels outdated, yet it may be the only doorway back to wisdom. If our leaders, creators, and even ordinary individuals could return to the ability to say, "I do not know," society might rediscover clarity. But instead, we build personalities on certainty even when that certainty is manufactured. The most alarming shift is internal. The human mind has traded curiosity for content, reflection for reaction, and independent thought for collective noise. We want to feel informed, not to be informed. We want to believe we are thinking, when in reality we are often only reacting to stimulus. This is the world Socrates warned us about, not a world without knowledge, but a world filled with unexamined certainty. In such a world, intelligence doesn't disappear, it simply goes unused. To ask deep questions today feels rebellious. In a culture trained to respond instantly, a pause is revolutionary. The act of thinking, just thinking, is enough to set someone apart. If Socrates appeared today, asking the same questions, would we listen? Or would we scroll past him on Instagram, label him negative, outdated, too slow for our attention span? The answer reveals the state of our civilization more than any data could. We are not deprived of truth, we are distracted away from it. The problem is not information overload, but reflection deficit. Our minds are flooded with content, but starved of silence. And without silence, consciousness cannot grow. Without introspection, wisdom cannot form. When a society prioritizes constant stimulation, it loses the capacity to look inward. It becomes reactive rather than reflective, loud rather than aware. Yet, Socrates still speaks to us across centuries, not offering answers but inviting us back to questions. What is knowledge if not examined? What is truth if not tested? What is understanding if not earned through effort? The purpose of thinking is not to win arguments or to appear intelligent, but to see reality clearly, even when it is uncomfortable. And this is where our crisis begins, because modern culture does not want clarity. It wants comfort. It wants pleasant illusions more than demanding truths. It wants confidence rather than contemplation. Socrates was not killed because people did not understand him, but because he forced them to understand themselves. Truth is not always painful, but it is always confronting. And confrontation is the enemy of ego. So here we stand, in an era that rewards visibility over intellect and certainty over humility. An era where ignorance is not the absence of information, but the refusal to examine it. An era where we do not lack knowledge, we lack self-awareness. The question is no longer whether society has changed, but whether we are willing to change ourselves. Ignorance today is no longer a lack of access to knowledge. It is a mindset built from convenience, speed, and intellectual laziness. We live in the most informed century in human history, yet our thinking is shallow, fragmented, and easily manipulated. It is not intelligence that has vanished, but patience, discipline, and the willingness to question. Socrates believed that the most dangerous form of ignorance was not the uneducated mind, but the mind that believed it already understood everything. When people stop questioning, wisdom dies. When people stop doubting, ideology replaces thought. And when thought is gone, manipulation thrives effortlessly. In our age, we are drowning in information, but starving for meaning. Data is everywhere, but understanding is rare. We confuse access with mastery, and exposure with wisdom. The internet has given us everything except the ability to interpret it. We scroll, we skim, we absorb headlines instead of ideas. Thinking has been replaced by reacting. Reflection has been replaced by emotional impulses. We feel strongly, but understand weakly. The mind becomes a machine of instant opinion, incapable of silence, incapable of introspection. Socrates would look at our world and ask, not why we are ignorant, but why we are so comfortable remaining that way. We chase entertainment like oxygen, filling every moment with noise so we never hear our own thoughts. Silence has become uncomfortable because silence forces self-awareness. Carl Jung once said that people will do anything to avoid confronting their own soul. Our era proves him right. We consume distraction to avoid reflection. We run from ourselves and call it progress. But progress without depth is merely movement, motion without direction, speed without destination. Socrates warned that if a society values pleasure more than virtue, distraction more than dialogue, and entertainment more than examination, collapse is inevitable. That prophecy is no longer a warning, it is a diagnosis. Look at our heroes today. Not thinkers, but performers. Not philosophers, but influencers. Not questioners, but persuaders. We reward charisma over clarity, spectacle over substance. And in doing so, we build an environment where truth must fight for survival. Our public discourse has transformed from a search for understanding into a battlefield for attention. Facts are now optional. Emotion is currency. Outrage is fuel. We no longer seek what is true, we seek what feels right, what aligns with our biases, what keeps us entertained. People don't follow logic, they follow stimulation. A viral clip influences more minds than a library ever could. Socrates would not fear ignorance, he would fear this. Because modern manipulation does not need force, censorship, or chains. All it needs is distraction. A distracted mind is easily guided. A reactive mind is easily influenced. A mind incapable of thinking is incapable of resisting. Power has learned that it is easier to rule those who are entertained than those who are educated. Influence no longer requires truth. It only requires attention. And whoever controls attention controls perception. Whoever controls perception controls belief. And whoever controls belief controls the world. The illusion of freedom is perhaps the most effective form of control. We believe we are free because we can choose between infinite content, infinite voices, infinite opinions. But choice without awareness is not freedom, it is chaos. A mind without reflection is a mind without autonomy. Socrates taught that true freedom begins within, in mastering one's thoughts, desires, impulses. Without this inner mastery, external freedom means nothing. To illustrate this, he compared the soul to a charioteer driving two horses, one disciplined, one wild. If reason loses control, the soul is dragged uncontrollably into chaos. Today, we are the charioteer asleep at the reins. Our impulses guide us more than our intellect. Our desires lead more than our judgment. Technology amplifies the horse, not the driver. Speed increases, but direction disappears. We mistake motion for progress. We mistake connectivity for understanding. We mistake visibility for value. We mistake information for wisdom. And this is how ignorance evolves into power, not by hiding information, but by overwhelming it. Not by silencing thinkers, but by distracting them so deeply that thinking never happens. A society addicted to stimulation cannot sustain reflection. A society that cannot reflect cannot recognize truth. And when truth is indistinguishable from noise, the fool becomes king. Socrates believed dialogue could cure ignorance, but what happens when people no longer desire the cure? What happens when illusion becomes more comforting than clarity? What happens when a population prefers being entertained over being awakened? The answer is already unfolding. We do not live in an era where knowledge is absent. We live in an era where knowledge is unused, where curiosity is optional, where silence is feared, where introspection is avoided. People don't want answers that demand responsibility, they want answers that make them feel good. And any mind that seeks comfort over clarity becomes easy to govern. This is why wisdom declines. Not because intelligence disappears, but because critical thought becomes inconvenient. Thinking is effort. Doubting is work. Reflection requires discomfort. So society chooses the opposite speed: distraction, emotion, the fast food of the mind. Socrates understood that the greatest enemy of wisdom is not stupidity, but arrogance without awareness. The belief that one already knows is what closes the mind. And a closed mind, no matter how intelligent, becomes blind. At this point, the question that matters is no longer about society, it is about us. Are we thinking or merely reacting? Are we seeking truth or seeking stimulation? Are we living consciously or drifting through noise disguised as knowledge? The future of wisdom depends not on culture, but on individual minds willing to question, reflect, and awaken. Socrates saw clearly that the collapse of a civilization begins the moment its citizens lose the courage to think independently. Today, we are witnessing exactly that transformation. People no longer evaluate ideas, they consume them. They do not reason, they repeat. Opinion has become identity, and identity is defended with emotion instead of evidence. In such a climate, truth becomes negotiable, bendable, diluted, softened to fit personal bias. And bias spreads faster than fact, because fact requires effort, but bias requires only feelings. Our collective mind has replaced inquiry with certainty. And certainty without examination becomes ideology. Ideology is convenient, it removes the burden of thinking. It tells us what to believe, instead of asking us to discover it. But what is convenient is rarely wise. Socrates challenged ideology not to destroy belief, but to awaken responsibility. He understood that belief without reflection is merely obedience wearing a mask. The modern world gives us infinite voices, yet we listen to so few. We surround ourselves with opinions we already agree with. We curate our feeds into echo chambers, where contradiction feels like attack and disagreement feels like threat. We have mistaken comfort for truth. We have mistaken sameness for safety. Diversity of thought is no longer celebrated, it is filtered out by algorithms designed to feed us what we already like. Reflection weakens. Curiosity dies. And when curiosity dies, wisdom has no oxygen left to breathe. This generation confuses exposure with understanding, as if seeing a headline equals learning, as if scrolling equals thinking, as if information equals insight. But information is raw material, not knowledge. Knowledge is processed through reflection. Wisdom is born only when the mind dares to question itself. That step, the inner confrontation, is where most people stop. Thinking hurts more than scrolling. Reflection is harder than reacting. To confront the self is to confront discomfort, contradiction, limitation, shadow. So society avoids it, and we disguise avoidance as productivity, as busyness, as constant motion. But motion without direction is noise. A life without introspection is an unexamined life, and as Socrates declared, the unexamined life is not worth living. He did not mean life must be perfect, but that life without awareness becomes unconscious existence. We become spectators of our own mind instead of its author. We live by habit, impulse, and cultural programming instead of deliberate understanding. To see how modern ignorance spreads, we only need to observe attention. Attention is the most valuable currency in the digital world. Entire industries exist for no purpose other than to hold your gaze for one more second. Not to educate you, to capture you. Not to develop your mind, to rent it. Algorithms do not serve wisdom, they serve addiction. They amplify what stimulates, not what enlightens. Outrage spreads. Fear spreads. Sensationalism spreads. Wisdom does not, because wisdom asks you to slow down, to think, to reflect. And reflection does not generate profit. Socrates would not fear misinformation, he would fear the speed of consumption that prevents examination. A slow lie is less dangerous than a fast truth that cannot be processed. The problem is not access to knowledge, but the pace at which it is swallowed without digestion. We are mentally full, yet intellectually malnourished. A buffet of information cannot nourish a mind that refuses to chew. If we continue this path, the future is predictable. Societies will be ruled not by the wise, but by the entertaining. Truth will matter less than narrative. Intelligence will matter less than charisma. Authority will belong not to those who know, but to those who are seen. And visibility, not virtue, will define power. At this point in history, the greatest rebellion is not shouting louder but thinking deeper. Not speaking more but listening more. Not reacting quickly but reflecting slowly. Thought is an act of resistance. Awareness is a form of revolution. Clarity is a threat to systems built on distraction. Socrates died because he questioned the foundations of society. If he lived today, he would not need poison, he would be drowned out by content. His execution would be silent, a slow suffocation beneath endless entertainment. Not hated, forgotten. Not silenced, ignored. And that would be a tragedy greater than death, because a world that forgets its thinkers forgets itself. But Socrates also knew that transformation never begins with the masses, it begins with one mind. One person willing to examine their beliefs. One consciousness willing to separate truth from noise. One individual strong enough to say, I choose reflection over distraction. I choose understanding over reaction. I choose awareness over comfort. In a world like ours, the thinker is the rebel. The questioner is the outsider. The silent mind that listens is more powerful than a million voices shouting without understanding. The future does not belong to the loud, it belongs to the aware. Wisdom cannot be given, it must be developed. Knowledge cannot be inherited, it must be earned. And truth cannot be consumed, it must be sought consciously. The modern mind is not weak, only untrained. It can still awaken. It can still see clearly. But awakening begins when the mind finally pauses, finally breathes, finally asks itself, what do I truly know? What beliefs have I accepted without examination? What thoughts are mine, and which ones were fed to me? These questions may be uncomfortable, but discomfort is the birthplace of clarity, and clarity is the beginning of freedom. Socrates taught that the greatest victory is not over others, but over oneself. A person can conquer armies, command nations, influence millions, yet remain enslaved to their own mind if they never learn to question it. The downfall of a society does not begin when its enemies become stronger, it begins when its people become intellectually passive. What we proudly call the information age is, paradoxically, an age of inner dependency. We depend on the thoughts of others. We outsource interpretation to headlines, to voices we trust blindly, to algorithms that choose what we see. The mind that no longer questions is the mind that no longer belongs to itself. Socrates understood that wisdom is not a possession, it is a way of living. A daily practice of awareness, honesty, and humility. He believed that truth is something we must constantly earn, not inherit. This is why he refused to compromise his integrity even when faced with death. When Athens demanded he abandon his principles, he chose hemlock instead. His final lesson was not spoken through words, but through sacrifice. He proved that it is better to die conscious than to live unconscious. Better to fall with integrity than rise through deception. His death was not a defeat, it was a warning to every civilization that places comfort above truth. Centuries later, we stand at the same threshold. We build temples of distraction where entertainment is worshipped and thought is forgotten. We sacrifice depth for dopamine. We trade awareness for amusement. We are surrounded by sound, yet unable to hear ourselves. Surrounded by knowledge, yet unable to understand. Surrounded by choice, yet unable to choose consciously. If Socrates returned today, he would not ask us what we know. He would ask us whether we are awake. Because awakening is not an event, it is a decision. A choice to think rather than react. To observe rather than absorb. To seek rather than scroll. The modern thinker does not need to rebel against governments, only against distraction. Not against society, but against unconsciousness. To think clearly today is to swim against the current of culture. To stay aware today is to resist the gravitational pull of comfort. But resistance is where growth begins. Wisdom does not survive on accident, it survives through those who carry it. Through minds courageous enough to slow down in a world addicted to speed. Through individuals who prefer silence when everyone else is shouting. Through souls who value self-awareness more than self-display. You cannot transform the entire world at once, but you can transform the space within your own mind. And that single transformation is powerful enough to influence others in ways you may never see. Revolutions do not always begin in streets, sometimes they begin in thoughts. So the final question is the same one Socrates asked thousands of years ago. Are you living consciously or merely existing among the unconscious? Are you the author of your mind or the audience of your impulses? Are you awake or dreaming with your eyes open? The answer may unsettle you, and that is exactly why it matters. Because discomfort is not a sign of failure, it is the first spark of awakening. The moment awareness begins, illusion loses power. You do not need to escape the modern world to be wise. You only need to remain aware within it. Every time you pause before reacting, you weaken ignorance. Every time you question before believing, you strengthen clarity. Every time you seek understanding over stimulation, you evolve. Wisdom is not found in noise, but beneath it in reflection, in silence, in self-examination. Socrates did not want admirers, he wanted thinkers. He did not want followers, he wanted individuals capable of confronting truth directly. His legacy is not a doctrine to memorize, but a mindset to embody. To question, to reflect, to remain humble even in knowledge. To know nothing, and from that nothing, begin to truly know. If you have reached this point, it means you are not satisfied with shallow answers. You are one of the few who still seek depth in a culture of distraction. One of the few who chooses consciousness over comfort. In the eyes of Socrates, that already makes you a philosopher, not one who loves argument, but one who loves truth. And perhaps the only question that matters now is the one you must ask yourself quietly, honestly, without distraction. Am I awake? If the answer is yes, then your real journey has only just begun.